What in the hell do you think you're doing?" The words, sharp as shards of glass, cut through the quiet hum of the cabin. Brenda, the lead flight attendant, planted her hands on her hips, her smile as thin and brittle as old plastic. "Excuse me, young lady," she said, her voice dripping with a saccharine venom. "First class is reserved for paying passengers. I think you've made a mistake." Arya Vance, a young black woman of 22, blinked slowly, momentarily stunned by the raw aggression. The shock wasn't that she was being questioned. She'd faced that her whole life. It was the sheer, unapologetic hostility. She looked down at the embossed cardstock in her hand, then back up at Brenda's smug face. "I am a first-class passenger," she replied, her voice a quiet, steady current against Brenda's raging tide. "Here is my ticket." "There must be some misunderstanding. You simply don't belong here," Brenda insisted, her eyes flicking over Arya's simple but elegant attire, as if it were a costume. "If you don't move along to the back of the plane immediately, I will be forced to escalate this. And trust me, you don't want that." Little did Brenda know, the very woman she was humiliating with such relish was not just some girl trying her luck. She was the daughter of the airline's owner, a silent titan who was about to bring Brenda's long-serving prejudice crashing down around her in the most public and catastrophic way imaginable. Before we dive deep into this spectacular collision of arrogance and consequence, tell me where you're watching from in the comments. And if you believe that every single person deserves to be treated with dignity, hit that subscribe button and turn on notifications, because you are not going to want to miss a single second of the justice that is about to unfold. The John F. Kennedy International Airport Terminal was a symphony of controlled chaos. A living, breathing organism of hurried footsteps, the rolling percussion of suitcases on polished floors, and the murmur of 1,000 different stories all converging on this single point. Amidst the sea of travelers, Arya Vance was an island of tranquility. She wasn't trying to stand out, but she radiated a quiet confidence that drew the eye, an invisible aura that spoke of purpose and self-possession. In her hand, she clutched her first-class boarding pass to London. She was a poised and brilliant young woman, a prodigy in the tech world who had just finalized the sale of her groundbreaking software company, a company she had built from scratch in her college dorm room. This flight wasn't just a journey, it was a triumphant return, a victory lap gifted to her by a father who was bursting with pride. Dressed in a tailored black blazer, comfortable silk trousers, and understated loafers, an outfit that whispered wealth rather than screaming it, Arya navigated her way to the exclusive Stellaris Air Polaris lounge. The moment she stepped inside, the cacophony of the terminal faded, replaced by the hushed tones of ambient lighting, the soft strains of jazz, and the scent of expensive coffee and leather. This was a sanctuary, a world away from the world. Around her, C-suite executives tapped away on laptops, sipping complimentary champagne, while well-dressed couples discussed their European itineraries. Arya found a secluded armchair, placing her phone and a cup of black coffee on the small table beside her. She looked at her boarding pass for what felt like the 100th time, not from disbelief, but from a deep, buzzing sense of anticipation. This first-class seat wasn't a luxury she took for granted or felt the need to flaunt. It was a right she had earned, a symbol of her own relentless hard work. Her phone buzzed, a message from her father lighting up the screen. "About to board?" Arya smiled. "Almost there. I'll text you when I'm settled. Everything is perfect." Arya's father, Marcus Vance, wasn't just a proud dad. He was the enigmatic, low-profile owner of Stellaris Air, the very airline she was about to fly. But his was a quiet power. He was a man who had built an empire on a foundation of humility and respect, a man who knew the name of the janitor who cleaned his office and treated him with the same courtesy he afforded his board of directors. He had instilled those values in Arya since she was a child. Respect, he'd always told her, is the only currency that never loses its value. Very few people knew Arya was his daughter. Marcus was fiercely private about his family life, and Arya cherished the anonymity. She wanted to be judged on her own merit, not on the vastness of her father's success. She glanced out the panoramic window at the tarmac, her thoughts drifting. She had been living in Silicon Valley for the past 4 years, completely immersed in her startup. While she had thrived on the independence, the distance from her family, especially from Marcus, had been a quiet ache in her heart. This trip was different. It wasn't just a flight, it was a homecoming, a return to the life and the people she missed dearly. As she prepared to board, her heart was filled with excitement for what lay ahead. A surprise reunion with her entire family in London, a celebration dinner organized in her honor, and the precious opportunity to reconnect and reflect on how far she and they had come. But Arya could never have predicted the storm of prejudice she was about to fly into, and Brenda Harper could never have imagined the career-ending trouble her ingrained bigotry was about to cause her. From across the lounge, near the polished service counter, Arya noticed 2 flight attendants. One of them, a woman with sharp, severe features and hair pulled back into a bun so tight it seemed to stretch her face, cast a disdainful glance in Arya's direction. This was Brenda Harper, the lead flight attendant for the London flight. Brenda exchanged a smirk with her younger colleague. "First class is getting far too accessible these days," she muttered, her voice low but laced with a clear-as-day superiority. "It's losing its prestige." Her colleague offered a nervous, non-committal chuckle, smart enough not to engage with Brenda's sour attitude. When the boarding announcement for flight SA-710 to London, Heathrow finally echoed through the terminal, Arya stood, adjusted the strap of her leather carry-on, and joined the priority line. Brenda was now stationed at the aircraft's entrance, her face set in a mask of practiced, professional warmth. "Welcome aboard, sir," she chimed to a silver-haired man in a bespoke suit. To a woman clutching a Birkin bag, she chirped, "Enjoy your flight, ma'am." When Arya reached the front of the line, Brenda's smile flickered and tightened. Her eyes scanned Arya's boarding pass, narrowing almost imperceptibly. The ticket clearly read, "Passenger, Vance, Arya. Seat 2A, first class." Yet, instead of directing Arya to her rightful seat, Brenda plastered on a condescending smile. "Oh, honey, economy is just down the aisle to your left," she said, gesturing dismissively towards the back of the plane. Arya blinked, the casual insult taking a second to register. "This pass says first class, seat 2A, she replied evenly, holding it up for Brenda to see again. Brenda didn't even glance at it. There must have been some kind of error with the system. "Just head on down to economy, please," she said. Her tone was superficially polite, but the undercurrent of dismissal was a tidal wave. Arya's grip on her carry-on tightened, her knuckles turning white, but her voice remained unshakable. "There is no mistake. This is my seat in first class." The passengers queuing behind her began to fidget, their impatience a tangible pressure. The tension at the gate was thick enough to taste. Brenda leaned in closer, her voice dropping to a conspiratorial whisper laced with threat. "Look, I don't want you to cause a scene here. Be a good girl and head to economy so we can keep this line moving. Have you ever been treated unjustly, made to feel like you didn't belong somewhere you had every right to be? What would you do in Arya's situation? Share your thoughts in the comments section below. And please don't forget to click on that subscribe button right now if you're as invested in this story as I am." Refusing to be intimidated, Arya simply stepped past Brenda and onto the plane, her posture a silent statement of defiance. Brenda's eyes followed her, a flicker of pure annoyance flashing across her face before she schooled her features back into a plastic smile for the next passenger. Arya walked through the serene first-class cabin, its spacious pods and calming blue lighting a world away from the confrontation at the door. She found seat 2A, effortlessly lifted her carry-on into the overhead compartment, and settled into the plush leather. Moments later, the sharp click-clack of heels announced Brenda's arrival. She was a seasoned professional, known throughout the airline for her exacting standards and a notoriously sharp tongue. She marched directly to Arya's row, her face once again a mask of professional politeness. She paused, raising a hand as if to halt an intruder. "Excuse me, young lady," Brenda began, her voice firm and loud enough to draw the attention of the surrounding passengers. "As I said, first class is reserved for paying passengers." Arya looked up from the window, her patience wearing thin. "And as I said, I am a first-class passenger," she reiterated, her voice soft but with a core of steel. She held out her ticket again. "Here, it's all right here." But Brenda waved the ticket away as if it were an irrelevant piece of paper. Instead, she crossed her arms, her skepticism a palpable force field. "I highly doubt that," Brenda said dismissively. "Now please step aside so I can deal with this situation." The words struck Arya like a physical blow. She sat frozen, the blood rushing to her cheeks. Around her, the murmurs started. Passengers in the economy line, still filing past, began to notice the unfolding drama. Pitying glances, judgmental whispers. Arya felt their eyes on her, each glance a hot brand of humiliation. But Brenda was on a roll now, enjoying the public display of her authority. She stepped closer, her voice growing sharper, more accusatory. "Let me see that ticket again. Are you absolutely certain you didn't just pick this up by mistake? Perhaps someone dropped it?" The insinuation was clear and ugly. Arya held out the ticket for a third time, her hand trembling ever so slightly with suppressed rage. "It is mine," she said, her voice dropping to a near whisper. "It is not a mistake. My father bought it for me." This information only seemed to fuel Brenda's scorn. She raised a perfectly sculpted eyebrow. "Your father? How lovely. And where might he be at this moment?" "He's waiting for me at our destination," Arya answered honestly. Brenda let out a small, derisive scoff, glancing around at the other first-class passengers as if to say, "See? Can you believe this story?" The doubt in her eyes was a weapon, and she was wielding it with practiced skill. She took the ticket from Arya's hand, examining it as if it were a forgery. "I'm going to need to verify this," she announced curtly. "Don't go anywhere." As Brenda strode away towards the galley, Arya sat motionless, a knot of pure, unadulterated humiliation tightening in her chest. She was on display. The whispers from the surrounding seats grew louder. Some people looked at her with sympathy, but others wore expressions of smug judgment. No one, not a single person, spoke up to question what was happening. In that moment, Arya felt the profound sting of isolation, a loneliness that was all too familiar. But then, her father's voice echoed in her mind, a mantra from her childhood. "Always carry yourself with dignity, Arya, especially when others forget theirs." It was hard, so hard not to let the emotions overwhelm her. Tears pricked at the corners of her eyes, hot and threatening, but she refused to let them fall. She would not give Brenda the satisfaction. She took a slow, deep breath, anchoring herself in the truth of who she was, Arya Vance, daughter of a man who built an empire from the ground up, a man who taught her that true self-worth was an internal fortress that no one could breach. Brenda returned a few minutes later, her expression one of grim satisfaction. "Excuse me," she began again, her voice now unnecessarily loud, designed to carry. "I'm going to have to ask you to move to the economy section. This seat has already been assigned to another passenger." The commotion drew more heads. Arya calmly reached for her boarding pass stub again, holding it up. "But this is my assigned seat. It has my name on it. How can it be assigned to someone else?" she asked, her logic a quiet protest against the absurdity of the situation. Brenda's mask of politeness finally slipped completely. Her arms crossed, her stance became confrontational. "If you refuse to comply, I will be forced to escalate this and call airport security," she threatened, her voice ringing with finality. The tension in the cabin crackled. Whispers spread like wildfire. "Looks like someone was trying to pull a fast one," a businessman muttered to his companion. Across the aisle, an older woman frowned, her brow furrowed in disapproval. "This just doesn't feel right," she whispered to her husband. But their dissent remained a whisper, lost in the larger narrative Brenda was painting. A man a few rows back announced loudly, "Well, if she doesn't belong here, she doesn't belong here. The attendant has every right." Brenda, feeling validated by the support of some passengers and unwilling to back down from her position of power, took the final, drastic step. She picked up the in-flight phone. "I need security at the gate for flight SA-710. We have a passenger refusing to cooperate." Minutes later, which felt like an eternity to Arya, 2 uniformed airport police officers boarded the plane. Their presence instantly amplified the tension, turning a dispute into a spectacle. They approached Arya's seat, their faces professional but firm. Arya calmly explained the situation, her voice steady despite the adrenaline coursing through her veins. She presented her boarding pass, defending her right to be in the seat she had paid for. But Brenda's narrative had already taken root. The officers deferred to the flight attendant's authority. "Ma'am," one of the officers said, his voice low but authoritative, "we've been asked to escort you to a different seat." Arya met his gaze, her heart pounding with injustice. "This is my assigned seat. I have every right to be here," she repeated, holding up her ticket for them to see. The officers glanced at Brenda for confirmation. She gave a sharp, decisive nod, her expression one of utter vindication. "Her correct seat is in economy," she said firmly, sealing Arya's fate. Despite Arya's quiet protests and her perfectly valid ticket, the officer's duty was to de-escalate, and they took the path of least resistance. They escorted Arya from her first-class pod, down the aisle, and into the cramped reality of economy. The stares and whispers followed her like a physical trail, a cloak of humiliation she was forced to wear. Her composure never broke, but inside, a part of her spirit felt like it was fracturing. Back in first class, Brenda basked in her triumph. She walked through the cabin with a self-satisfied smile, her voice carrying just enough for those around her to hear. "That's how you handle troublemakers," she said to a fellow flight attendant, who nodded uncertainly. Then, glancing around at the other first-class passengers, she added with a smug finality, "First class is for people who belong here. So." Humiliated but composed, Arya found her new seat in row 34, a middle seat squeezed between 2 other passengers. As the flight continued, the drone of the engines was a sharp contrast to the silent storm raging inside her. She felt the weight of Brenda's judgment with every passing moment, every skeptical glance she had endured. It wasn't just about the embarrassment. It was about the insidious, underlying message that she, a young black woman, was inherently out of place, that her success was an anomaly to be questioned. Was Brenda right to judge Arya based on nothing more than her own prejudice? Let us know in the comments, and if you believe in justice and equality for all, hit that subscribe button for more powerful stories like this one. Arya pulled out her phone, the unsent text to her father staring back at her. "Dad, this is a nightmare," They wouldn't believe me. But she couldn't bring herself to send it. She knew he would react instantly, a hurricane of fury, and for now she just wanted to be invisible. But Arya was not one to let injustice consume her. She took another deep, cleansing breath. The whispers might continue, the stares might linger, but she would hold her head high. She knew who she was. Meanwhile, in the first-class galley, a younger flight attendant cautiously questioned Brenda. "Are you sure about that? Her ticket looked legitimate." Brenda scoffed, her tone dripping with arrogance. "Oh, please! She thought she could just waltz in here and claim a $7,000 seat. It takes experience to see through that kind of grift. I had to put her where she rightfully belongs, for the good of our real passengers." A few nearby passengers chuckled in agreement, while others exchanged uneasy glances, sensing her comments had crossed a professional line. Confined to the cramped economy seat, Arya tried to will herself into a state of calm. Her first-class ticket, once a symbol of her accomplishment, now felt like a cruel taunt. Her fingers trembled as she pulled out her phone again and typed a different, more measured message to her father. "Dad, they moved me to economy. The flight attendant claimed my seat was a mistake." Marcus Vance's reply was almost instantaneous. His texts were always short, but they carried the weight of his unwavering presence. "Stay calm. I'm on it. Let me know if anything else happens." Arya stared at the screen, her father's support a digital hand on her shoulder. It gave her the strength to endure. For now she would wait. She would trust that the wheels her father was setting in motion would turn at their own pace and in their own time. Later in the flight, Arya got up to stretch her legs, making her way toward the lavatory at the back of the plane. While she waited, she heard a soft voice beside her. "I saw what happened up front." Arya turned to see the older woman from first class who had frowned earlier. Her eyes, kind and wrinkled at the corners, were filled with concern. "That wasn't right," the woman continued, her voice a quiet beacon of indignation. "You didn't deserve to be treated that way. If there's anything I can do to help, please let me know." For a moment, Arya was disarmed by the woman's genuine kindness. A small, grateful smile touched her lips. "Thank you," she said. "I appreciate that, but I think it's being handled." The woman nodded, placing a gentle hand on Arya's arm. "You're handling this with remarkable grace," she said before returning to her seat, leaving Arya with a flicker of warmth in the cold atmosphere. Up in first class, Brenda was still riding high on her perceived victory, boasting to her colleagues. "Honestly, I'm doing everyone a favor. It's about maintaining standards. If we let just anyone in, it's chaos." Back in seat 34B, Arya tried to ignore the uncomfortable proximity of her seatmates and the dull ache in her back. She simply wanted a glass of water. She pressed the call button above her head, the soft chime barely audible over the plane's hum. Several minutes passed. She watched other flight attendants attending to passengers, but no one came to her row. Finally, she saw Brenda making her way down the aisle. She stopped abruptly at Arya's row, her expression flat, her voice sharp. "Yes." Arya met her gaze, keeping her tone polite. "Could I please have a glass of water?" Brenda's response was a thin smile that never reached her eyes. "Certainly," she said, her voice clipped, before turning on her heel and disappearing toward the front of the plane. Arya watched her go. A few minutes passed, then 10, then 15. Still no water arrived. Arya's eyes followed Brenda as she moved through the first-class cabin, elaborately serving champagne, engaging in light-hearted banter and fluffing pillows. It was a performance of attentiveness, and its message was crystal clear. Arya did not exist. The deliberate nature of the neglect wasn't lost on Arya. Her patience, already worn thin, began to fray. She pressed the call button again. This time the chime felt louder, an insistent, mocking sound. Brenda finally reappeared, her movements slow and reluctant. Her expression was now tinged with open annoyance. "Yes?" she asked again, her tone sharp enough that passengers nearby glanced over. Arya's voice remained calm, though it took every ounce of her self-control. "I asked for water over 15 minutes ago. May I have it now?" Brenda's fake smile returned. "I'll get to it when I can," she said, her voice dripping with dismissive indifference. Without waiting for a response, she vanished into the first-class galley. Arya's calm facade finally began to crack. This was no longer just prejudice. It was a targeted campaign of hostility and humiliation. Her eyes dropped to her phone, to her father's last message. "Let me know if anything else happens." Her fingers flew across the screen. "Dad, it's getting worse. The flight attendant is targeting me. She's deliberately ignoring my requests and making a spectacle of it. It's becoming unbearable." She hit send, the finality of the act bringing a mix of relief and renewed frustration. Her father's reply came in seconds. "Stay exactly where you are. I'm making the call right now." The words carried an ominous weight. Arya knew what that meant. If her father was making the call, the consequences would be swift and severe. As she waited, a young girl in the seat across the aisle leaned over. "That flight attendant," she whispered, "is always horrible to people of color. I fly this route a lot. She acts like she owns the plane. I really hope she gets what's coming to her." Arya offered the girl a small, weary smile. "I have a feeling her karma is arriving in London." Midway through the flight, as the aircraft cruised at 37,000 feet, the secure satellite line in the cockpit buzzed to life. The captain, a veteran pilot named Frank Miller, picked up the receiver. His expression was initially neutral, but as the voice on the other end began to speak, his posture stiffened and his eyes widened slightly. The voice was calm, measured, and radiated an authority that needed no introduction. It was Marcus Vance, the owner of the airline. His instructions were brief, precise, and left zero room for ambiguity. "Yes, Mr. Vance," Captain Miller responded, his own voice now carrying a new weight of urgency. "I understand completely, sir." The call lasted less than a minute, but its impact resonated long after. As the captain placed the receiver back in its cradle, he took a slow breath. He knew that when Marcus Vance made a personal call to a flight mid-air, it wasn't just a complaint. It was a reckoning. He activated the intercom, his voice calm but firm. "Miss Harper, please report to the cockpit immediately." In the first-class cabin, Brenda was in the middle of a story when she felt a tap on her shoulder. She turned to see Captain Miller standing behind her, his face a granite mask of seriousness. Her initial annoyance at the interruption quickly curdled into apprehension. "Captain," she said, her professional smile wavering. "What's the matter?" "I've just received a satellite call," the captain began, his voice low and devoid of warmth. "From Mr. Marcus Vance." Brenda's brow furrowed, a flicker of confusion crossing her face. "Victor Bennett," she repeated, the name not immediately registering in her bubble of self-importance. "Yes," the captain confirmed, his steady gaze boring into her. "The owner of this airline. He has been informed of an incident on this flight, an incident involving his daughter." At the word daughter, the color drained from Brenda's face. The carefully constructed world of her own authority began to crumble. The pieces clicked into place with horrifying speed. That girl. Vance. Marcus Vance. The realization hit her not like a cold wave, but like a physical punch to the gut. "Mr. Vance has instructed me," the captain continued, his voice an indictment, To let you know that he will be meeting this plane personally upon landing in London. He expects a full explanation. And from this moment until we touch down, you are to ensure that his daughter is treated with the utmost care and respect. Is that understood?" For a moment, Brenda stood frozen, her mind a maelstrom of panic. I didn't realize," she stammered, her legendary sharpness dissolving into a pathetic whimper. The captain's expression remained unchanged. "That is irrelevant," he said coldly. "What's relevant is that you failed in your duty." Brenda could only nod stiffly, her throat suddenly as dry as desert sand. "Understood, Captain." As he turned and walked back to the cockpit, she remained rooted to the spot. The confidence she had wielded like a weapon just moments ago now a pile of dust at her feet. She muttered to herself, a desperate whisper, "I'm sure it's just a misunderstanding." But the words were hollow, a flimsy shield against the tidal wave of consequences she knew was coming for her. "What do you think is going to happen when the plane lands? Will Brenda be able to talk her way out of this? Let me know your predictions in the comments, and hit that subscribe button if this story has you on the edge of your seat. For Brenda Harper, the remaining hours of the flight were a special kind of hell. The captain's words, "He will be meeting the plane personally," echoed in her head, a relentless drumbeat of impending doom. Every routine task became a monumental effort. Her hands trembled as she poured a passenger's coffee. Her once commanding voice was now a nervous quaver. Her colleagues exchanged worried, knowing glances. The sudden and dramatic transformation from haughty queen of the cabin to terrified, fumbling wreck was impossible to ignore. "What's wrong with her?" one whispered to another. "She looks like she's seen a ghost." Brenda's distraction began to affect her work profoundly. She mixed up drink orders, forgot meal requests, and repeatedly returned to the galley just to grip the counter, trying to steady her nerves. The iron-fisted authority she had cultivated over 2 decades had evaporated, replaced by the raw, primal fear of a person who knows they have made a catastrophic mistake. Finally, she couldn't take it anymore. She glanced toward the economy cabin, where Arya sat calmly reading a book, her expression serene, as if she were in a library, not the center of a storm. It was that very composure that unhinged Brenda completely. Swallowing what was left of her pride, Brenda loaded a tray with champagne, gourmet chocolates, and a hot towel. She made the long walk down the aisle, her heart pounding a frantic rhythm against her ribs. Each step felt like a march toward her own execution. She stopped beside Arya's row, clearing her throat. Miss Vance?" she began, her voice barely a whisper. "Can I get you anything at all? A drink? A snack, perhaps?" Arya looked up from her book, her expression entirely neutral, but her eyes were sharp, missing nothing of Brenda's desperation. "No, thank you," she said politely, her calm a more potent weapon than any shouted accusation could ever be. Brenda's forced smile faltered. "Are you absolutely sure? Anything at all, please. It would be my pleasure." Arya simply shook her head. "I'm fine." The polite, quiet rejection was 100 times worse than anger. Over the next hour, Brenda became a pathetic spectacle. She made no fewer than 5 trips back to Arya's row, offering extra blankets, premium headphones, even a full meal upgrade from the first-class menu. Each time, Arya declined with the same unwavering, quiet politeness. The other passengers watched this bizarre drama unfold with rapt fascination. "She's never this attentive," one passenger murmured. "Something big must have happened." Finally, Brenda abandoned all pretense. She approached Arya empty-handed, crouching slightly in the narrow aisle to bring herself to Arya's eye level. Her face was a mask of strained desperation. "Miss Vance," she began, her voice trembling. I just wanted to say how terribly sorry I am for the misunderstanding earlier. It was entirely my fault. I didn't realize who you were." She trailed off, realizing too late how incriminating that sounded. I hope we can just put this all behind us." Arya studied her for a long moment, her calm demeanor an unbreakable shield. Then, with quiet, measured words that sealed Brenda's fate, she replied, "The matter is no longer in my hands." Brenda blinked, confused. What do you mean?" "My father is handling it now," Arya continued, her tone steady but with the chilling finality of a judge's gavel. "He's the one you'll have to convince. He will be the one who decides whether or not you are forgiven." Brenda's face crumpled. She opened her mouth to plead, to explain, to beg, but no words came. The absolute gravity of her actions, of the power she had so casually abused, crashed down on her. The consequences were entirely, terrifyingly out of her control. Arya turned her attention back to her book, a clear dismissal. The conversation was over. As the plane began its smooth descent into London, many passengers had already noticed the unusual activity on the runway below. A sleek, black Range Rover, the kind that ferries royalty and heads of state, had pulled up directly beside the gate. The whispers started immediately. Who could that be for? As soon as the plane docked, the cabin door opened, and Marcus Vance stepped onto the aircraft. He wasn't loud or flashy, but his presence was immense, a quiet vortex of power that commanded the attention of the entire cabin. He was flanked by two senior airline executives who looked profoundly uncomfortable. Ignoring everyone else, Marcus walked with a purposeful stride down the aisle, his eyes scanning the rows until they landed on Arya. His serious expression instantly softened, the tension in his face melting away as he crouched beside her seat in the cramped economy row. "Are you all right?" he asked, his voice a warm, gentle rumble that was meant for her alone. Arya looked up at him, the composure she had maintained for hours finally cracking to reveal a flicker of relief and exhaustion. "I'm okay now, Dad," she replied, her voice soft. Marcus placed a reassuring hand on her shoulder. "It's over," he said quietly. "You won't have to deal with this ever again." Then he stood, and the warmth vanished, replaced by a calm, unshakable authority. He turned his attention to the front of the cabin, where Brenda Harper stood frozen, her face as white as a sheet. "Miss Harper," Marcus began, his voice not loud, but carrying to every corner of the silent cabin. "I understand there was an issue with my daughter's seat today." Brenda's composure completely disintegrated. "Mr. Vance, sir, I am so sorry. I didn't know she was your daughter," she stammered, the words tumbling out in a desperate, incoherent torrent. Marcus's gaze remained locked on her, unflinching. "The issue is not whether you knew she was my daughter," he said, his voice as sharp and clean as a surgeon's scalpel. "The issue is how you treated a passenger. The issue is the assumption you made. The issue is the disrespect you showed, not just to her, but to the uniform you wear and the values this company was built on." He paused, his eyes sweeping over the rest of the cabin. "Stellaris Air is not just a business," he declared. "It is a promise that every single person who steps onto our planes will be treated with fairness, dignity, and respect, regardless of who they are, where they come from, or what they look like. Today, Miss Harper, you broke that promise." A spontaneous round of applause erupted from the passengers. It started with a few people, then swelled into a full-blown ovation, a cathartic release of the tension that had been building for hours. They clapped for Arya's vindication and for Marcus's unequivocal stance. For Brenda, the sound was an agony, each clap a hammer blow to her pride and her career. She opened her mouth to apologize again, But Marcus cut her off with a slight raise of his hand. "Effective immediately," he said, turning to the stone-faced executives beside him. "Miss Harper is removed from duty, pending a full investigation into her conduct. Her behavior today is a gross violation of our company's core principles, and she will be held fully accountable." One of the executives nodded and stepped forward. "Miss Harper, please come with us." Defeated and publicly shamed, Brenda was escorted off the plane, avoiding the gaze of the dozens of passengers who had just witnessed her downfall. As the plane emptied, Marcus returned to his daughter's side. The story, however, did not end there. In the weeks that followed, Marcus Bennett launched a sweeping top-to-bottom review of company policy. He instituted a mandatory, intensive new training program called Dignity in the Skies, focusing on unconscious bias, de-escalation, and inclusive customer service for every single employee. Brenda Harper was dismissed. For months, she reflected on her actions, her initial anger giving way to a profound sense of shame. She began attending therapy to understand the deep-seated prejudices that had driven her behavior. Eventually, she wrote a long, heartfelt letter of apology to both Arya and Marcus, not asking for her job back, but expressing her deep remorse and her commitment to change. Moved by her sincerity, Marcus, in a stunning act of grace, offered her a second chance, a probationary, non-customer-facing administrative role contingent on her completing extensive personal development courses. Brenda accepted, humbled and grateful. At a press conference, Marcus spoke publicly about the incident, turning a moment of shame for his company into a powerful teaching moment. "Privilege comes with responsibility," he stated. "Whether it's the privilege of sitting in first class or the privilege of wearing this uniform, we all have a duty to treat one another with basic human decency. No one should ever be made to feel unwelcome or unworthy." The story went viral, sparking a global conversation about prejudice and accountability. For Arya, the experience was transformative. It solidified her resolve to use her own considerable platform in the tech world to champion diversity and advocate for systemic change. The pain of the experience had forged her into an even stronger, more resilient, and more compassionate leader. Weeks later, Arya and Marcus were on another flight together, seated side by side in first class. The atmosphere was different. The smiles from the crew felt genuine, their service effortless and respectful. As a flight attendant offered Arya a glass of champagne with a warm, welcoming smile, Arya looked over at her father, a silent understanding passing between them. The change was palpable. She leaned back in her seat, the satisfaction washing over her, not from a sense of victory, but from the knowledge that one ugly incident had been a catalyst for real, meaningful progress. Change isn't always comfortable, she thought to herself, but it is always worth fighting for. Arya's story is a powerful reminder that our true worth is not determined by the opinions of others, but by our own character and integrity. If you believe in standing up for what's right and treating everyone with the respect they deserve, smash that like button and subscribe to our channel for more inspiring stories that challenge us to be better. We'll see you in the next one.